battle between every startup and incumbent comes down to whether the startup gets distribution before the incumbent gets innovation.
Yep.
Who's winning this battle at the moment?
So, in most of the markets that I'm looking at, whether that be Europe, Asia, or America, I think that the startups are winning the battle. They are moving the customers across, and more of them are moving their main banking relationships. And we don't naively believe that we'll ever have everyone's main bank relationship. But what is starting to happen is that millions of people are moving across to this new form of banking, and I'm not sure that the big banks are matching the levels of innovation. And don't get me wrong, I look at even some of our banks in South Africa. They've got some really great digital services. I think their apps are fantastic. Their product offerings are good. So don't get me wrong, but I don't think that they're focused on the customer needs to the extent that these neobanks are.
I mean, that can't be sustainable though, because I think let's have a look who asked the question. I'll call it out. I think it was Raymond Berger. We must see some convergence coming over the next 5 or 10 years here. Yep. Because it's now there are so many neobanks, so many fintech, so many players in fintech in general. What do you expect is going to happen over? Actually, Chris Skinner came up with this one, which I thought was a great question. Are we expecting a lot of consolidation where the incumbents start to go buy some of the neobanks, or could we actually have the complete reverse, where an Envo or a Revolut or an N24 actually just become so successful they buy the JP Morgans of the world?
So to be honest, I think it's going to be a combination of both. There are going to be some successful acquisitions of successful challenger banks and neobanks. Big banks will decide we're going to go and spend X billion and we're going to go and buy one of these, and that will happen, and some of them will be successful. Some of them, and most of them, I think will fall into the corporate trap, and over time, like Simple Bank and BBVA, will sort of lose their magic, lose their allure. The founders will float off once their buyout periods have gone, and I think you find suddenly you're back into big corporate, and 5 years down the track it's been integrated into the bank. So I think that will happen. Equally, some of the neobanks, and I use Chime, but there are many more, Revoluts, are getting so big and so successful that and by the way, they are already buying mid-sized banks and small banks to get banking licenses. I wouldn't be surprised if a decade out, some of them are the names that we know, and that the Citis and the JP Morgans aren't necessarily the biggest banks in the world anymore. I think some of these banks will be. So yeah, I think it's going to be a combination. It's a very interesting period, but it's the perfect time for this. COVID got the world to accept digital much more than they ever had. So there's much more trust in digital. There's much more acceptance in digital. And more and more, you're speaking to people at the legacy retail banks. And I was a branch banker for a lot of my career, but you're speaking to people who are saying, I've been in a bank branch for a year, and the only time I have to go in is to do something fairly mundane that they should have had on the app. So I do think over time there are going to be some big winners in the challenger bank and neobank space, but equally I think there will be some success stories of acquisitions by the big banks.